Good afternoon. My name is Lawrence Lee, and my topic for this presentation is historical bias. And my knowledge question for this presentation is, to what extent is history biased? This knowledge question will be discussed or related to the real-life example of how the famous Chinese historical novel Romance of the Three Nations influenced how many readers think is real history and their impression of the actual people in history instead of the novel characters. History refers to what happened in the past, but what we read on books are not the actual facts. Instead, they are histories written by the people after the historical event was over. For an example, the history of the Yuan dynasty in China was written by the government of the Ming dynasty, which replaced the Yuan dynasty. And the history of the Ming dynasty was written by the Qing dynasty, which replaced the Ming dynasty. The winner always gets to write the history, and this is a rule that can be applied to the history of the entire mankind. Whoever wrote or recorded that history was recorded, this information was recorded still by humans. So there's a very high percentage that the recent history may be biased because most of the history books are organized and written by governments that conquer the previous dynasty or kingdom. So the current government can change and manipulate what happened in the written history to control people's opinion on certain things. For example, depicting the last emperor of the previous dynasty or enemy as a stupid tyrant. A real-life situation for this would be how the Qing dynasty wrote about Li Zicheng, a rebel leader before the leader of Qing dynasty became emperor. If we are to draw a timeline for the Ming and Qing dynasty, Li Zicheng will be found in the middle of the two dynasties. He was the one who conquered the capital of the Ming dynasty and forced the last emperor of the Ming dynasty to commit suicide. Though before he was able to declare himself as the new emperor, the army of the Qing dynasty rushed into the capital and destroyed his troops. So to gain support from the people who are still loyal to the Ming dynasty, the Qing dynasty claimed that it is avenging the emperor of the Ming dynasty. So in the Ming history that the Qing dynasty wrote, Li Zicheng was depicted as a very evil and treacherous character to give the credit of killing this demon to the Qing dynasty government. So this is called political bias, and it's the first type of bias that may affect the accuracy of the written history. Secondly, people's personal emotions may be a factor that affects the accuracy of history, because it is very easy to include small fragments of personal opinions about the historical character into the recording of history. Since history was written and recorded by hand, So for example, the famous records of the Grand Historian, written by a Chinese historian from 2,000 years ago in Han Dynasty, was a perfect example. There were two heroes or generals in the Han Dynasty who are famous for their accomplishments of defeating the Hunnish intruders that haunted the northern border of the Han Dynasty for over 100 years. And they should have received fairly positive comments from the historians, especially Chinese historians. Though the author of the records of the Grand Historian showed clear reluctance in complimenting some of the two generals' accomplishments. The two generals are actually relatives. The older one, Wei Qing, was the uncle, and the younger one was the nephew. And Wei Qing's cousin was actually the wife of the emperor of China by then, the queen of the Han Dynasty. So the author suspected that the two generals got the chance to lead the army only because of their relationship with the queen, instead of being the true heroes themselves. And the truth is, this relationship only gave the generals the chance to lead the army. Their successes, on the other hand, was built upon their own abilities. So from the perspective of a historian, it can be indicated that the history in the records of a grand historian written about Wei Qing and Huo Xubing were biased due to the personal emotion of the author. So this brings us to the second type of bias that may affect the accuracy of written history, which is the personal prejudice. And at last, it is a similar kind of bias. It is the literature fiction bias, which I call it. Because, for example, in the Romance of the Three Nations, people that were originally not evil or stupid were depicted as evil or foolish characters for literary needs. And this kind of things happens throughout many of the historical novels. In the Romance of the Three Nations, there's this character called Cao Cao. This character was depicted as a very evil character in the novel, and which caused most of the readers of this novel to hate this character. And this type of culture, this opinion actually got absorbed by the Chinese culture, and from then on, the name of this character actually means a characteristic of being evil and being evil and treacherous. So yeah, this is the third type of bias that may affect the accuracy of written history. The written history is not the only source that we can use to evaluate the accuracy. Archaeological evidences can be used to verify the accuracy of the written history. For an example, the famous terracotta. Historians and archaeologists can evaluate the written history of the size of the tomb of the first emperor in the Chinese history, because as we all know, the terracotta is part of the tomb of the first emperor and is only a very small fragment of the entire tomb. And also, from the terracotta itself, the state of art of China from 2,000 years ago can also be verified. In China, the level of preciousness of an antique is not based on the ounces of gold or the number of diamonds that it is made out of. Rare jewelry only means that it costs a lot of money, though it does not have any historical meanings. So in order for an antique to be named national treasure, the antique must be made of rare materials and be the evidence of a fragment of unproven history. And this shows the true value of the archaeological evidences. And apart from the variations from these evidences, another way of verifying the accuracy of history is through comparing the fragments of written history to the same fragments of written histories from other sources, usually from people with contradicting ideologies or other governments that does not have a strong beneficial relationship with the original resource of the written history. And this method is very similar to the peer reviews that natural scientists might use to verify their information during researches. So as a result, there is no bias in the events that happened in the past, because what happened and it cannot be changed. So the information can be found through different methods of verification, such as through archaeological evidences and source reviewing. Though the written history recorded by people can be heavily biased due to political intentions, personal prejudice, and the literary use of fiction stories. Thank you very much.